Fans of the Horus Heresy and Warhammer 40,000, thank you very much for joining me for a cover-to-cover review of sorts of an 8th edition index, and this is the first of the Imperial indexes from Forge World. Imperial Armour Index 1 or Index Forces of the Adeptus Astartes. This is the first of 3-4 books that Forge World are going to release at the start of 8th edition to give 40k players rules for using Forge World vehicles in their games. I was interested to get this, I think I was actually more interested to get this than the actual 8th edition rules in a way, because they're quite simple, and I will talk about that in a separate review. But because I'm interested in the Horus Heresy mainly, I've got this book because it contains most of the war gear in terms of armour and dreadnoughts that you find in the Heresy. Not quite all of it, most of it. I wanted to get it for that point of view. I got it from the perspective of being able to, shall I say, jury rig Horus Heresy games in 8th edition. To test it out really, because at the moment, the current proposition from Forge World is that the Horus Heresy will remain in 7th edition for the time being. Like, conceptually, what 8th edition has done with the rules. Of course, liking that conceptually and playing it in a game and trying it out and seeing how it works are two different things. So that's why I bought this book. The other book I'm interested in getting is the Imperial Forces book, which will contain the rules on Titans and other super heavy walkers. So that's another one I'm keen to get as well. This is set up a little bit different to what I normally do for a book review, because normally I'll sort of do top down and go through it. However, this is a softback book, and as you'll see, it doesn't necessarily stay open very well all the time. I'm going to kind of like, I'm actually filming this upside down and back to front almost. Well, upside down. And I'm just going to go through it like this and talk you through what's in it. I'm going to talk about the contents, but then I'm mainly going to actually look at and describe to you stats for some of the key vehicles, and then make comparisons against what those vehicles were like in 7th edition. Also, make some observations on how the meta has shifted between the two. Our vehicles in 7th edition have translated into 8th edition. It's not necessarily a straightforward exchange of stats, and there's some quite interesting examples in here. I'm also going to look at some of the weapons as well. There's a couple of interesting ones in here from a balance perspective already that I can see, so I'll call some of those out to you as well. So let's start. So yeah, it's a softback book. It's retailing at £15 at the moment, and it's actually, before I get into it, it's pretty much entirely data sheets. Actually, I guess if you compare this to the 8th edition rulebook, which we will now just have a guest appearance of, so this guy, or Guyette if you prefer, is actually mainly fluff and scenario rules. There's only a dozen pages of actual game mechanics rules, and there's no unit stats in it. So this, by comparison, is almost entirely unit stats and points values, and it's much more of a game resource, shall we say. Anyway, let's get into it, so let's have a look through. I mean, in terms of production quality, I mean, it's a softback book, so it's clearly not going to wear as well as some. However, I've got softback books I bought 25 years ago for wargaming that are still in good condition. All my technical readouts from Battletech are softback books, and they've worn fine. Although I don't expect this to have anything like the longevity from a gaming point of view of anything that Battletech has ever produced. Anyway, let's get into it. We have a contents page. We have, and I'll just run you through this, we have Adeptus Astartes Battle Armour, Adeptus Astartes Heavy Armour, Astartes Dreadnoughts, Astartes Strikecraft, Battlefield Support, and then War Machines of Grey Knights, the Inquisition, and the Adeptus Astartes. So that's the vehicle section. And then we have a character appendix as well here. So all of the Forge World characters, I believe, or certainly a lot of them for 40k are in here. So for example, there are old favourites like Luft Huron of the Astral Claws, the Tyrant of Badab, Asturian Moloch of the Minotaurs, Tiberius the Red Wake of the Carcharodons, and the rest as well. Oh, and even the Inquisitors as well. So we've got Inquisitor Lord Hector X. And then finally we have an appendices, and this is essentially all the points values, so for playing what they're called tournament play in 8th edition, and then there's all the weapons as well and their costs. So yes, so that's what we've got. Right, we get a section where it talks about how the rules work and what data sheets are. This is exactly the same as what's in the core 8th edition rulebook, so we won't go through that in detail. And then straight away we are into the Adeptus Astartes Battle Armour section. This in effect is the standard tanks section for the Marines. So as I said before, these books are no nonsense, they're all stats. So what we got, well, let's go through these. So we've got a Demos Pattern Predator. A couple of key points about vehicles in 8th edition. So essentially there are no vehicle rules in 8th edition. There are a handful of specials. For example, there's now no rules on fire arcs, which is peculiar and in some ways maybe better, because now if you have a rule that says, well, you can only shoot what the weapon can point at, well, maybe that's better, and only what the weapon can see. It gets around a whole load of issues with the fire arc rules, which sometimes are a bit artificial. The stats I'm going to look at in particular are the toughness, the wounds, the saving throw, the movement, and then the weapons. I'm not so bothered about weapon skill and stuff. That's not a massive influencer. Predator is toughness 7 and 12 wounds. It's got 4 wounds per hull point from 7, so this has actually got quite a favourable conversion rate. It has an armour saver 3+, which seems to be about standard for vehicles. A lot of vehicles got an armour saver 3+, and it has a basic move value of 12. So the Predator actually looks a pretty deadly vehicle now. So a couple of call-outs on the weapon stats. I mean, if we look at this, the Infernus cannon, so this is a flame cannon, so it's only got a range of 8 inches. However, that's arguably better than the old template, and it has heavy of 2d6 shots, and it hits the target automatically. So flamers you don't have to throw to hit, so that's very effective. This thing which they've rather obnoxiously called the C-beam cannon, this is a conversion beamer. They could have called it a conversion beamer cannon because it's a heavy, this is what was previously the heavy conversion beamer. But this now is interesting. Range 72, heavy 1, strength 6, -3 save and D3 damage. This then goes on to a very old style rule, and it now gains more damage for distance fired. And if you cause a casualty, then you then do 2d6 additional hits at strength 6 to the target unit. So they've changed the meta around that weapon. It's no longer a blast weapon. It's kind of like it's a single target shot, but if you do destroy that target, you then get a load of subsidiary damage coming from it. Intriguing. Predator Autocannon. So this was kind of like the higher performance autocannon. This is now heavy 2d3, strength 7, -1 save modifier, but damage is a fixed damage value of 3. This is an interesting characteristic of weapon damage in 8th. There seem to be the weapons with the variable damage, which so far seem to be more of the energy weapons. So las cannons, actually because you've got hunter killer missiles as D6. I mean, Magna Melt Cannon's D6, you've got the D3 on the C-beam cannon. Notice that most of the autocannons have fixed values, and plasma weapons have fixed values as well. So this means actually there are a group of weapons where you will score damage much more consistently than, let's say, a las cannon, although obviously the las cannon's got high strength and armor modifier. These guys have got their own benefit. Quite intriguing how that meta is going to play through. So anyway, that's going into quite a bit of detail on the first example. Right, so we then get the Demos pattern Vindicator Laser Destroyer, Infernum pattern Razorback, and a Relic Land Raider Proteus. So some interesting vehicles here. So this one caught my interest, the Vindicator. Compared to the Predator, this Vindicator gets a toughness of 8, so it's 1 point higher toughness. Makes it actually pretty tough. It still keeps a save of 3+ and a wound value of 12, although it is slower at movement 10. Here we see a good example of how having movement values back and toughness values and saves allows the game designers to introduce more variability unit stats. So you're no longer constrained by armor values and hull points. You know, you've got toughness, wounds, save, all to play around with, and move. So that's good, I like that. This is a version with a laser cannon. And here we get the first weapon which I've seen at strength 10, which is a laser cannon on the overcharge mode. Special rule though, if any hit rolls with this weapon result in a 1 or more to hit, the firing vehicle suffers 3 mortal wounds. So that's a bit like losing a hull point in the old money, although it's more favourable because again this has got 12 wounds, so you've got 4 hull points per hull point from the old money. Razorback gets 10 wounds, saving throw 3+ and toughness 7, so that seems pretty tough. Movement 12, so same speed as a Predator. Now this is a good one, the Relic Land Raider Proteus. Now there's a couple of things to call out here. So firstly is the stats, it's toughness 8, wounds 16, saving throw is 2+. So the Land Raider is an unusual tank that gets a saving throw of 2+. Movement value is only 10 though, so it's quite slow. It's slower than the Predator. So that, I like that they've introduced a differentiator there, which allows a Predator to be a fast tank as opposed to just a medium tank. Yes, the Predator's still a medium tank, but it also has a speed advantage over the heavier Land Raider. Nice. I mean, the weapons mix on the Land Raider Proteus is pretty straightforward. We do find out though here what the power of Machine Spirit does. This is a much better way of expressing the power of the machine spirit rule than what we saw in 6th or 7th. And here it's very straightforward. If you move, you don't suffer a to-hit penalty when you shoot. Much better. What else does it have? The Accelerator Augury Web has changed. It now has a bubble effect that is a denial area to deploy in. So if you had a couple of Land Raider Proteuses, you could actually link their denial bubbles together to prevent enemy deep strikers and jump units coming in, which is quite intriguing. Here's an interesting thing which I actually think is a little bit sneaky and probably a rule that I would ignore myself. And basically what it says is this. It says this model can transport 10 infantry, fine. If you transport a Terminator or a jump pack trooper, it's 2 models. A Centurion, you know, Marine inside a Space Marine, is 3 models. But then it says it cannot transport Primaris models, and it's just, what? I think that seems to be a bit of a cynical ploy to push people into buying Primaris specific transporters. So for me, if I were to play this, I would just ignore this rule, because there's no good reason why this can't transport Primaris Marines. Primaris Marines, really, they're no more bulky than a Terminator at the most. So yeah, yeah, rubbish. Ignore it. Right, let's move on to another one. We have a Land Raider Helios, which is a vehicle I'm not familiar with. Same stats, so it's got the missile battery. Land Raider Prometheus, lots of heavy bolters. So now this thing, quad heavy bolt gun, it has 2 of those, each is heavy 12. So this thing pumps out 24 heavy bolter shots a turn. Excellent. Battle Ore specs, which is the key thing to the unit previously, and it now says enemy units do not receive a benefit to their saving throws for being in cover when attacked by this unit. So I think the Land Raider Prometheus has now taken on a new lease of usefulness from that. Now here's a good one, the Land Raider Achilles. So the Land Raider Achilles was the toughest of the tough Land Raiders, and by goodness me, it's translated through into its 8th edition stats. Its toughness stays at 8, but its wounds goes up to 19. Astonishingly tough. The quad launcher options, unfortunately, you don't get the Heresy era variant that has the Volkites. You know, you could easily just play it with the multi-melters. Of course, the Achilles always had various special rules around damage, and it's got a very simple expression in 8th edition, and it's this inviolate armor, and it says this model has a 4+ invulnerable save. There you go. You can see the Achilles is going to retain its reputation for being an absolute beast to kill, and at 19 wounds, this thing's weighing in, as we're going to get on to some of the Marine super heavies, it's not that far off the super heavies in terms of its wound value. Here's a Heresy staple and favourite, the Sakaram battle tank. Here's a relic version. So stats are toughness 7, 14 wounds, so it's tougher than the Predator. It's actually not that far off a Land Raider in terms of its wounds total. Saving throw is only 3+, but get a load of this, move value is 14. So the Sakaran is now a tough but super fast tank, so yeah, really neat. It gives it a very unique place in your force. Weapons, so the Accelerator Autocannon, which is a staple gun for this tank, is now an Assault 8 weapon, so you can move and shoot without penalty. You can advance, should I say, advance and shoot without penalty. Strength 7, -1 AP, damage 2, and it says attacks made with this weapon suffer no penalty to hit against anything with fly ability. If you roll a 6 to wound, the AP becomes -3. So that's a bit like the old rending rule, and a very similar sort of expression there. I think the Sakaran looks actually a really good tank for 8th edition. Yeah, really, really good indeed. We then have Sakaran Venator Tank Destroyer, and this is interesting to see the neutron pulse cannon rule. Here we have a shift in the meta, because the pulse cannon has gone from range 36, because it was like a snub-nosed assault gun. They've increased it up to 48 inches, so they've given it an extra foot of range. It's heavy 3, strength is 12, so that's a whopping 12, -4 AP, and damage is D6. And any vehicle that suffers a wound from the weapon but survives loses a -1 off its to hit rolls in the following shooting phase. So that's a new version, or the 8th edition version of Shock Pulse. Then it has another rule here, gyro stabilized mounting. This model does not suffer the penalty to hit rolls for moving and firing heavy weapons. It's a fast tank as well. Keeps the same 14-inch move. Next up is another interesting vehicle. This is actually a set of rules for a model that hasn't been released yet, and this is a Relic Sakaran with a Punisher cannon. So those of you who went to Warhammer Fest this year or saw any of the news about it, watched my video about it, you'll have seen that there's a Sakaran model in the works that's just got a big rotary barreled cannon on it, like the Leman Russ variant. So standard stats compared to other Sakarans. The Punisher rotary cannon is a heavy 18 weapon with range 36, strength 5, AP -1, damage 1. So a real infantry shredder, if there ever was one. And then it also has a great rule here called Rolling Thunder. If it doesn't move or advance, it can then re-roll any hit rolls of 1 with the Punisher rotary cannon. So it's a bit like a kind of twin linking. Cool, nice. Right, and that completes the standard battle tank section. We now move up to the heavy armour. And what better way to start the heavy armour than with the Spartan assault tank? Now, the Spartan has come on some. Toughness 8, 20 wounds and a saving throw of 2+, a move of 10, so it's a slightly slower heavy tank. 20 wounds, this had 5 hull points in 7th, so that's 4 wounds per hull point. So that's a favourable return rate. Not as good as the Sakarans, which got which were like 4.5 wounds per hull point, but still good rate. Now, one thing I will call out weapon skill here, because this Relic Spartan has a weapon skill of 5+, and it actually has a specific attack called Crushing Tracks. And if you look at its attack stat, it's 8. So this thing's actually in strength 8. So you can actually use a Spartan assault tank as quite a nasty crushing unit. It's yeah, really rather good. It's got the same, I mean, you've got all the weapon options. I mean, we get a new one here, the Laser Destroyer. Strength 12, -4 AP, D6 damage. If you score damage, you roll D6 on a 3 to 5. Your weapon damage goes up to 2d6. If you get a 6, the weapon damage goes up to 3d6. So this is a real armor killer. Really potent, that thing. Though no twin linked ability now. That's just a single shot. Keeps the same storage rules. It's got this same silly, it can't transport Primaris models. Ignore it. Don't see why they can't. Any other special rules? Steel Behemoth. The model may fall back in the movement phase and still shoot or charge during the controlling player's turn. So this is one of those rare units that can break that rule about falling back. Makes it very great for counterattacks, and particularly with that crushing attack rule. Yeah. So yeah, Spartan. No flare shield, but then again, I don't think the Relic Spartan never had a flare shield, so I don't yet know what a flare shield looks like. We'll move up to the siege guns. So we've got the Typhon and the Cerberus. Now, 22 wounds. These both had 6 hull points in 7th, so they've got 22, so that's slightly over 3 wounds per hull point, so 3.5-ish. So not as good as some of the tanks, but you know, still better than a Dreadnought. So yeah, we've had a good return rate. These get toughness 9. They get the Crushing Tracks. Weapons, right, Dreadhammer Siege Cannon. This looks nasty. Heavy, range 24, heavy 2d6, strength 10, -5 AP. Goodness me. Damage is fixed at 3. If you don't move, the range goes up to 48 inches. That's very much like it was in 7th edition, but pretty straightforward otherwise. The Cerberus, I've got a Cerberus, fascinating tank. It's got the same stats. Now, the interesting one here is, so now it has a heavy neutron pulse array. Range is 72, heavy 3, strength is 14. Goodness me, so that means a lot of the tanks we've looked at earlier, the toughness 7 tanks, this is going to wound them on a 2+. -4 AP and damage is 3 + D6. So the damage isn't actually quite as potent as it once was, but the strength, the hitting power is really high. That's actually interesting because you've got a mixture of fixed and variable damage there, so that actually should make this more consistent. Although I guess the flip side is it lacks the twin linking that weapon used to have. So yeah, different sort of meta there. If you could get a unit that can boost accuracy, this thing would benefit from that greatly because it only has 3 shots. But otherwise, similar sort of rules. Moving on now we get to 2 interesting tanks. We have the Fellblade and the Falchion super heavy tanks. We don't get the glaive because there's never been a relic version of glaive, basically to stop Tyrannid, Guardsman, Orc, and most of the players in 40k crying from having too many units vaporized by Volkite carronades. But we do get these 2. Now, this is where there's a significant shift in the meta. So it's toughness 9, save is 2+. Movement's 10, so you know, same speed as the Land Raider. However, it only has 26 wounds. Now I hear you say, what do you mean only has? Well, in 7th edition, these things had 12 hull points. They were the toughest super heavy tanks on the battlefield, and they were in proportion to the other vehicles. Here they've only got 26 wounds, so they've actually only got slightly over 2 wounds per hull point, which feels like a bit of a disconnect, and I don't quite understand why they've given them so few wounds, as you'll see when we get onto some of the other Space Marine heavies, which have a more direct translation. So they seem to have deliberately toned down the number of wounds these vehicles have for some reason. Peculiar. And there's no question really around balancing it, because there's no other balance. Okay, it's got a high toughness value at toughness 9, so maybe that's what they've done. They've in higher toughness reduced wounds. I'm not quite sure. I'm not sure about this yet. And then you get the stats for this. So has it got anything special? Not particularly on either of them. Now, what I do want to do here is just draw your attention to the main gun on each tank. Right. So the Fellblade Accelerator Cannon first. So you get a choice of 2, both 100 inches range, so that was as before. HE shells have heavy 2d6, strength 8, -3, armor save and 2 damage. If you attack a unit with 5 or models in it, you can reroll the number of attacks. So, i.e., it's good against groups of infantry. So that's not a bad attack. Then you also get the anti-armor shell. So these are like the rocket-propelled ones that are real armor crackers. So you've got strength of 14, -4 AP and 6 damage. So that's a fixed damage of 6. So an extremely consistent weapon, very hard hitting as well. Now let's just compare that to the Volcano Cannon, or the twin Volcano Cannon on the Falchion. Here it has heavy 2d6, a range of 120 inches. Strength is 16. AP is -5 and damage is 2d6, and you can re-roll failed wounds when targeting Titanic units with this weapon. I think the killing power on this twin Volcano Cannon seems astonishing compared to even what it was compared to in 7th. The 2d6 shots with this enormously powerful gun seems a huge amount of firepower. I mean, I guess if you work this out, your best possible result, you could get 12 times 12, 144 damage in one shot. Maybe they've done that deliberately. That seems to... I mean, that's quite an unlikely outcome, that, but I'm expecting a Warlord Titan to only have 100 wounds. He might have less. So it looks like on paper at the moment that a Warlord, you could core a Warlord with a single shot from this, which you simply couldn't do in 7th. I guess the average is much lower though. I prefer that as a damage profile to the old D system, which was just silly, whereby you had a 2 to 5 on a D6 was D3 wounds, and then all of a sudden you got to 6 and it became 6d6. That's a much more sensible damage profile, although it's still quite random. Interesting one though. And then finally we have, for all you mover fans, we've got the Relic Mastodon. Here's the interesting thing, right? The Mastodon is toughness 9, saving throw 2+, movement 10. It's got 30 wounds though. Now in 7th edition, this had 10 hull points, so that's a straight 1:3 ratio on the hull point translation. Again, why is the Fellblade and the Falchion so low by comparison? You know, these had 12 hull points before. Using the conversion rate on this, these should have 36 wounds, but they don't. Anyway, right, now this thing introduces a change in the meta, which I'm not sure I'm very keen on. Yeah, I don't know. And it's to do with void shields. Right, in 8th, the rules on void shields have been completely reworked, and they are now an invulnerable save, and your void shield save is linked to your damage level. So it starts off with a saving throw 5+, an invulnerable saving throw 5+. However, it's a super invulnerable save. The difference with void shields is they can protect you against mortal wounds. So default position on a invulnerable save is you don't get an invulnerable save against a mortal wound. A mortal wound beats an invuln. Not so with void shields. They give you a save. So it's now, though, it's a flat level of protection. They've taken away the sort of layering rules around void shields, whereby you would have a number of void shields, they had to be knocked down, and you could just attack the unit straight up. So, intriguing that. It also makes me wonder how, if they've given this void shield, so this used to have 2 void shields, which conferred a saving throw of 5+, invuln save of 5+. I mean, what's Warlord going to be? Does that mean the Warlord at full strength is on like a 3+ invulnerable save? Goodness me. Because of course a Warlord's supposed to have 6 void shields. I'm not sure on the void shield rules in 8th. Right, anyway. Moving on to Dreadnoughts. So got a Mortis Dreadnought and a Siege Dreadnought. So interesting thing about these low level Dreadnoughts, they only get 8 wounds, but they don't have a damage box effect. So they can take any amount of damage and they don't lose any capability. So they're consistent. 3+ save. Any interesting call out weapons here? Not particularly. We've got the same plasma rules as in other weapons, whereby you have standard and supercharged. Back in the first edition day, it would be sustained and maximal fire. But yeah, it just allows you to ramp the power up. If you go for your supercharge, to hit rolls of 1, inflict a mortal wound on the defender. So you've got the same sort of overheat rule, something like gets hot, but its effect has been substantially toned down, I think, because you've got 8 wounds now, and each fail gives you okay, you're making more shots, but I still think it's beneficial in terms of the overall risk, i.e. it's less risk. And that's good, and that was one of the problems with the old hull point system, the fact that, you know, if you're going to lose hull points to overheats, you only had 3. We then have a Contemptor Mortis Dreadnought. Now let's have a look at the Contemptor Mortis. So interestingly, oh sorry, we'll just flip back. The Siege Dreadnought and the Mortis Dreadnought have a move of 6. The Contemptor gets a move of 9 in an undamaged state, so it's a fast moving dreadnought. Better stats as well, it gets weapon skill, ballistic skill of 2. Carries Assault Cannon, how about that? Range 24, heavy 6, strength 7, AP -1, damage 1. So that's like a normal Assault Cannon, but 1 point higher strength, isn't it? Yeah, to be honest, the Kerry's Assault Cannon is no longer the gun it was, to be quite honest. Yeah, it's no better range, which was always the case, but of course, an Assault Cannon used to be 3 shots and the Kerry's were 6 with the same damage profile. Now the Kerry's just gets a point higher strength. So Atamantic Shielding is now a flat 5+ save, so there's no difference between melee and ranged saves. Venerable Dreadnought, 9 wounds. So high wound stat there, same 6 moves, so that's a box knot. I'm not so familiar with that, so I'm going to move past that because this is what I'm more interested in. We've got the Relic Contemptor and a Deredeo. Now, the Relic Contemptor gets 12 wounds, so that's 4-1 on hull points to wound ratio. Saving throws 2+, weapon skill, ballistic skills 2+, attacks is 4, so yeah, pretty good. Loads of weapons. I mean, oh gosh, what have we got here? I mean, you got, well, you know, Contemptors have got a huge arsenal available to them. Got Conversion Beam Cannon. Here's an interesting one, Graviton Blaster. So this is, in a sense, a Graviton gun. This has really changed quite a lot. It's now range 18, assault 2, strength is 5, -3 AP and 1 damage. If a target has a save characteristics of 3+ or better, this weapon increases its damage to D3. So yeah, quite a bit more potent against vehicles than it used to be, but not so good against infantry, and it's lost its area denial capability. Deredeo Dreadnought. Now the Deredeo's it's funny mixes of Deredeo. So the Deredeo gets 14 wounds, it gets a save of 3+, ballistic skills 2+. Now this is a slow Dreadnought, so there's a move of 7, or for a big Dreadnought it's slower. The guns have had maybe a little bit of a sort of nerf. The Anvilus Autocannon battery has lost 12 inches of range, as has the Hellfire Plasma Carronade. So these were 48 and 38 inch range respectively. They're now 36 and 24. So that's changed the use of this Dreadnought somewhat. The Arachnus stays at 48 inches, and the Aeolus stays at 60 inches range. Intriguing. Now this seems an oversight in the rules here. The Hellfire Plasma Carronade, you don't have any optional fire mode. Every time you roll to hit, if you get a 1, you suffer a mortal wound at the end of the attack. Why hasn't this weapon got an alternate fire mode? That's an oversight. That in 7th edition, the Hellfire Plasma Carronade had 2 fire modes, just the same as the other plasma weapons we've looked at. So why hasn't that been carried over into 8th? You know, for me, I would, until they get that, I would ignore that overheat rule because it just doesn't feel properly balanced. And it's not a proper translation of what that unit was like. And I don't know why they've nerfed the weapon ranges down. It makes no sense. Why would you do that? So yeah, I'm not sure about that. Yeah, I think that's wrong. It's not consistent with the other weapon changeovers we've seen. And again, with this plasma weapon, it just doesn't make sense. If we look at plasma cannons, they're 36 inch range, and this was in effect a type of plasma cannon. But yeah, they've decided to whack the range right down. Abilities, this has some useful abilities. It has a helical targeting array, which allows it to target flyers more accurately, and an atomantic device, or pavis, they've spelt it slightly differently this time, maybe. That gives an invulnerable stave to units of the same chapter as it, and it has what's called layered atomantic barriers now, which gives a 5+ invulnerable save against shooting or overwatch, or a 4+ save against melee attack. So this is now better protected in melee than it used to be, which is an intriguing one. Kind of makes sense in a way. Anyway, let's finish up on the Dreadnought front with the Relic Leviathan. So this is a big beast. Now we've already seen the Chaos version of this, so this is kind of like looking at the uncorrupted version. Move is 8, so it's a bit slower than a Contemptor. 14 wounds, toughness 8, so it's a real tough cookie. 2+ armor. Defensive abilities, it has reinforced atomantic barriers, so it has a straight 4+ invulnerable save, just as in 7th. And then the weapons, got some great weapons. I mean, the Gravflux Bombard, heavy D3, strength 9, -5 save mod, 2 damage. If you hit a monster vehicle or titanic unit, the damage becomes 5 per hit. And for every 5 models in a target unit, you add D3 to the number of attacks made by this weapon. So for me, the Gravflux Bombard is an absolutely must-have gun now. It's brilliant. You've got a Storm Cannon array with 10 shots now. And then how about this? A Cyclonic Melter Lance. 18 inches, heavy 2d3, strength 9, -4 AP and d6 damage. And then it has a melter rule, so you reroll your damage at half range or less. So very potent unit, Leviathan. Always has been. Oh, obviously we don't get the rules for the Volkite Colliver torso weapons. We only get the Heavy Flamer because it's not Heresy era. Right, Strikecraft. So what do we have here that I know? Xiphon Interceptor is one I know. Wounds is 11, so that's done rather well on the wounds exchange rate. Toughness 7, save a 3+, pretty decent. But 11 wounds, so this had previously 2 hull points. And I think the reason for this is it's much easier to hit flyers now. I think it's a standard -1. It's a flyer and it's got -1, but it's still a lot easier to hit than it used to be. So I think that's why they've upped the wounds to keep it balanced. Because otherwise, if you kept it, if you had say 6 wounds, I think it would just get torn out of the sky straight away. Storm Eagle Gunship, toughness 7, 16 wounds. Again, a lot of wounds. So I think that used to have 4 hull points. So that's 4 wounds per hull point. Same with the Storm Eagle Rock pattern. Fire Raptor's the same as well. Cestus Assault Ram, now this is an interesting one. Toughness 7, wounds 14, saving throw is 2+, that's a tough cookie. Magna Melter Cannon, range 24, heavy 2d3, that's pretty standard melter fare. And again, this has got the silly, can't transport Primaris models, but it can carry Terminators. Why? It doesn't make sense. Oh, Thunderhawks, fancy some Thunderhawks, I know you do. Now, the Thunderhawk, that's got 30 wounds, so that's had previously 9 hull points, that's done okay on the translation there. What we've got, Turbo Laser Destructor, how about this? Right, this is a Titan grade weapon. Range 96, heavy D, same range as before, heavy D3, strength 16, -4 save and 2d6 damage. So that's similar to the Volcano Cannon in terms of the damage stats. However, the firepower is nowhere near as good as the Volcano Cannon, which had a heavy 2d6, which I just seems crazy. This wound roll of a 6 automatically does a d3 mortal wounds to the targets. That's potent. That's a slightly different damage profile, isn't it? They get the heavy cannon as well. Thunderhawk Transporter. So if you got one of those when they were still selling them, you got the rules for it. You can transport a Land Raider or a Spartan now. Silly, can't transport Primaris rules. Don't know why. Or you can carry pretty much two of anything on a Rhino chassis, including Predators. That's neat. Void Hardened Hull. It has a 5+ vulnerable save, as does the Thunderhawk. The Thunderhawk doesn't have any Void Shields, nor does this, but they do get that invulnerable save. So they're pretty solid units, pretty tough. Much tougher than before, I think. And then finally the Sokar pattern Stormbird. This thing clocks in at 40 wounds, so that's a lot of wounds. Strength is 10, toughness 9, armor save is 3+. Now, this thing used to only have 2 void shields, but it's got better void shielding protection than the Mastodon did, because at full damage, it has a void shield saving throw 4+. So why does that have a better void shield save than the Mastodon. So they've messed around with the meta here on these, it seems. So it's got a whole host of special rules, 5+ invulnerable save, and bubble out your void shields as before. Tough cookie, and a lot of firepower. So it's yeah, it's got a lot. It's got 4 twin light cannons, 3 twin heavy bolters, and a battery of Hellstrike missiles. So yeah, it's very well armed. Let's finish up by having a quick look through the battlefield support. Rapiers, interesting. Rapiers are now only toughness 5. They used to be toughness 7. It does get 4 wounds though, where it only had 1 wound before. So they've same saving throw, so they've shifted the balance around. Only movement 3, so it's quite slow, but somewhat different meta there. Wind Scorpius, does that do? Barrage. Oh, right, so this thing's still going to be the bane of heavy infantry. So the basic profile is heavy 3d3 for the multi-launcher. Strength 6, -2 AP, damage 2, and you can shoot targets that aren't visible. If you stay still, you can fire twice. Ouch. Run away from that guy. Dreadnought, drop pods, tarantulas, and then a Castellum stronghold. Now that's really as much as I want to cover in this, because I was talking primarily around vehicles that are in some way related to the Heresy. But just to show you, we've also got the Inquisition Vehicles, and then we get the characters as well, the forge-walled characters. So here we've got one which I'm going to, oh look, Lord Commander High Karab Kuln, so our favourite space racist. People who remember the early 40k, and particularly chapter approved articles, will know what I mean when I call him a space racist. Then we've got Luft Huron. Now this guy's interesting, so I know Luft Huron, so I've played Astral Claws with him. He gets strength 4, toughness 4, ballistic skill and weapon skill of 2+, move 5, so he's in Terminator armor, yeah. 7 wounds, so he's a high level hero, 4 attacks. Yeah, he's a tough cookie. Does he get big guns never tire? He still gets a shadowed fate, so he's got this rule whereby he can get back up again if he loses his last wound, so that's quite neat. They've kept that. And then he still gets a orbital strike as well. And the orbital strike on a 2+ of a target unit takes d6 mortal wounds. So that's an interesting way of representing an orbital strike. Do any of these other ones I know? But Luft Huron was a very high level hero at 7 wounds. I mean, Asterian Moloch, who's a real tough cookie as well, he's still only 6 wounds. I don't really know these too well, so I'm not going to go through them a lot, but just flicking through you can see that we've got them. We get the agent, so we get Hector Rex of the Inquisition, we get Solomon Locke of the Inquisition as well, and then this guy Hecaton Icos, that's the character Contemptor Dreadnought for the Minotaurs. And then the final section of this book is the appendices. Now in here you get all the points values for the tanks. So now let's pick one. A Spartan now costs 320 points, a Cerberus is 480, a Mastodon is 734. So most of these are comparable, although Falchion is now 640, whereas previously I think it was about 530, 540, without any of the fancy Heresy era gear like the pulse, the neutron pulse wave generator. Sokar Pattern Stormbird is only 651 points. They were 850 in 7th. Thunderhawk Gunship 650 that's a bit cheaper. That was 750 before. So interesting how these have worked out. A Xiphon Interceptor is only 80. I'm sure they're about 160. What are the Land Raiders? Land Raider Proteus is 264, so that's more expensive now. Proteus was coming in as cheap, quite cheap as 220. But a Relic Sakaran is 155. That now includes the las cannons, that's about the same. Venator is 245, so that feels a bit more expensive. They've kind of moved around a bit. I mean, the Vindicator Laser Destroyer is 183, that was 130, so that's more expensive. So the points are shifting around, and same with the Dreadnoughts. We've got a Relic Contemptor at 135, a Relic Leviathan is only 175, well 175 was more like the cost for a standard Contemptor before, so that's moved. And the Deredeo is only 135. Then you've got all the other units that are given. You get the points for the Inquisition, then you get a series of tables which summarise the weapons. And there you have it, yeah. And that's the lot. So, intriguing. What do I think about this? Well, I don't quite know yet what to think about it because I've not played it. I mean, as a resource, it's a good resource. It's completely focused on the subject matter in hand. There's no fat, there's no fluff. It's all the unit stats. So in that regard, as a £15 book, it's a good investment, I think. I like it because I put Iron Hands on the front, and an Iron Hand Cerberus gets my marks. But yeah, from that point of view, it's good. Couple of balance issues in there, I think, or things that seem to be slightly out of whack. The can't transport a Primaris Space Marine rule is silly and ridiculous and should be removed. I can't see why that would apply. If you've got a vehicle that can transport a Terminator or a Centurion, then why can't it transport a Primaris? It doesn't make sense. So that, in my opinion, I would certainly house rule it out, but I think Games Workshop would definitely get rid of that. Why would you put a rule in like that? I just think they're doing it to try force people to buy some Primaris transports that are coming along. But yeah, now as a resource, it looks good. It's got lots of information. It's got loads of units in, loads and loads of units. I'll be using this as a resource to start doing some Heresy proxy gaming. Obviously, I haven't got anything that's got a Volkite gun I won't be able to use. So I haven't got stats yet for the Glaive, but I could just play the Glaive as one of the other 2 Space Marine super heavies. So yeah, anyway, that's an overview. I hope you found that interesting to get a feel for what the super heavy and the more exotic Forge World tanks look like in 8th edition. I think in general, well, the units have got more wounds, they're less susceptible to one-off knockouts, however their overall firepower has been stepped up substantially. So you can see that. I like the having finer tuned stats allowing you to have more gradation between the units. So we can have a slower moving Land Raider, an average speed moving Predator and a fast speed moving Sakaran, and that adds to the flavour of the unit and fits the fluff of the unit better as well. So I do like that. What you think about the stats, this book, etc. in the comments, I'll be interested to hear what you have to say as usual. Other than that, thank you very much for watching. I'll speak to you next time, and goodbye.